Okay, so hello, my name's David Wood. I'm a Cambridge-based artist in the UK. I've been painting for something like 36 years, and I'm just basically doing this introduction to give some guidance and best practice as regards what I do as setting up to begin a painting. So with no further ado, I just want to introduce some of these basic tools which I have as standard use when I start painting. So here we have some palette knives. I have 3 of these, all different shapes and sizes. I use these for paint mixing. I use them for adding medium to my paint, and also very good for cleaning up the palette as well. Also here is the scraper. You can get these from any cleaning store. They've basically got a razor blade on them, and they're very good for cleaning a glass palette. Not so good for cleaning wood palettes or paper palettes. And here in these jars I have my pre-mixed paint, which is a paint already pre-mixed with a medium of choice. It's a good idea to keep them in airtight jars and keep them in the fridge, and they will last considerably longer. And this is a glass palette which I've made from a former picture frame. So I'd certainly highly recommend making one of these palettes. This one's about A2 size, and it gives me a good amount of space in order to have my pigments at the top and mix any supplementary colours I need for any painting I'm about to do. So you can see on my palette I already have some colours laid out already, starting from the right hand side, or your right hand side. I have my titanium white. This is a standard white which I prefer to use as opposed to flake white. I also have my chrome yellow, alizarin crimson, burnt sienna, ultramarine blue. So this is what's referred to as a limited palette. What it effectively consists of is one red, one yellow and one blue, and of course white. And you could actually add an earth colour onto that as well. However, from time to time I may switch my burnt sienna to another earth colour called burnt umber. And the reason for doing this, it will just give me a different range of blacks and greys, lights and darks. Now if I wanted to, I could actually extend my palette of colours here to include a variant of a red, yellow, blue, but for the time being I'd really recommend a beginner painter to really just concentrate on working with a limited palette. One of the best known artists for using a limited palette was a chap called Anders Zorn. Now he's a Swedish painter around the middle of the 19th century, and he effectively had around 3 colours plus white. And the Zorn palette would have consisted of yellow ochre, cadmium red, ivory black and white. However, he would have supplemented this palette with various other colours throughout his career. So one of the primary reasons of having a limited palette is we always know what the origins of our mixtures are. So for example, if I mixed yellow and red together to make orange, then we can see that by looking at my palette here, we can see there's only one route in order to make the orange colour, and that's by using the only red and the only yellow which is on the palette. And another advantage of having a limited palette is it does encourage the overall colour harmony of the final painting. So another important aspect of oil painting, which is vital for every artist to know, is that the paint from the tube is actually too thick to work with. So to make the paint into something which we can use, we will need to add a medium. Now a medium is the oil which is used to create more viscous consistency. It can also increase the translucency of the pigment and also make the paint dry either faster or slower. Now the paint in the tubes already is bound with oil, and the oil in the pigment is actually linseed oil. And there are a number of mediums out there which the artist can choose from. A lot of them are based on linseed oil, but there are many other different types of oil which are available. And it's really up to the artist to experiment to see which ones give the artist the effect they want. Now my preference is safflower oil, and this is a slow drying oil. And the other preference I have is a fast drying oil, which is liquid. One thing you'll notice on the packaging for these mediums is that they don't actually detail how much medium to add to your paint mix. Now my preference is up to a third, depending on the translucency of the pigment. So the more translucent the pigment is, the less we would add. And the more opaque pigment is, for example a white paint, we would add up to a third of medium. So this is me about to mix up to a third medium to the yellow pigment. So the process is to squeeze out the amount of paint you want into a separate plate, and then using one of your palette knives, make a small well in the amount of paint you have on your plate, and then start to drop the amount of medium into the mixture, and then just mixing it until it's the consistency of mayonnaise, or until you feel you've added up to a third of medium per ratio to the amount of paint you have. Now you can see I have 3 palette knives here. I basically use all 3 palette knives for the mixing of the medium into the pigment. 2 palette knives to mix in with the paint, and 1 palette knife to use as a dropper, so I can actually control the amount of medium I add at any time. And the final consistency of the paint mix with the medium and the pigment added is kind of like mayonnaise. That is the kind of consistency I prefer to work with. It's much easier to paint with, flows very well across the canvas, easy to blend into other colours, and finally provides a nice surface once it's dry. And there we have it, our paint and medium mixed together to the right consistency, ready for a day's painting. Now you can either use this straight away, or you can store it in the jars like I was explaining before, and just take out the amount as and when you need it. Okay, so what we're going to talk about next is some basic colour theory. So we can see here on this image, we've got a colour wheel. Around the wheel, we can see it goes from yellow through to various oranges, blues, and so we can see that the wheel is split up into various segments of colour. It gives us a general idea of the stages that colour goes through from one primary colour, and the primary colours are yellow, red and blue. And this is a group of colours from which all other colours can be obtained through mixing. And then from yellow we go through to the next primary colour, which is red, and then from red to blue. And so we can see the various sections in between those primary colours. It goes from yellow-orange to orange, then red-orange, then red. And this variation will happen depending on the proximity and closeness of primary colour. Now if we look at these smaller wheels, you can see there's a wheel here called secondary colours. Now this is basically just a mixture between the 2 primary colours. So for example we've got red and yellow, which will obviously mix orange. We all learned these colour mixtures back when we were at school. Next we have red and blue, which makes violet, and blue and yellow, which makes green. And these are called secondary colours. Okay, and next up we have our intermediate or tertiary colours. These colours result from the mixture between, for example, red and yellow, which is orange. But if there's more of a proportion of yellow to it, then it will be yellow-orange. or if there's more of a proportion of red in that orange, then it's a red orange. So whatever primary colour it's closest to, that is the colour. You can call it yellow orange or red orange, or red violet and blue violet. And after this we have our analogous colours, which are basically the colours which sit next to each other on a colour wheel. So we can see yellow, yellow orange, and red. These are very useful for the painter when it comes to colour harmonies. So for example, if you wanted to paint a sunset, you'd be thinking about all those variations of colours from the yellow to the red, and how that would affect the landscape as well, introducing those into the landscape. After this, and probably most importantly for the artist, we have our complementary colours. These are effectively colours which actually complement each other, because they are kind of opposites on the colour wheel, but also contrast each other from warm colours to cool colours. So we can say a yellow is a warm colour, whereas a violet might actually be considered a cool colour. So as artists, we always want to be considering, when we do our painting, what colours we're going to use in the painting, how they will react to each other. Effectively, at the end of the day, we want our colours to harmonise. We want the colours to sing. And what I mean to sing is react to each other. And so on this colour wheel, we can see the basic sets of complementaries are yellow and violet. Then it will be red and green. Then it will be blue and orange. And we really want to consider keeping this kind of colour complementary in mind when we're actually painting. And then we go to the final three wheels. And first up is hue. Now hue is basically a general term for colour. If we were to look at the dictionary definition for this word, it would mean a gradation or variety of colour. The property of light by which colour of an object is classified as red, blue, green or yellow in reference to the spectrum. It can simply mean just colour as well, or form or appearance. Another meaning for this word hue from a painter's point of view is it actually often appears on our paint tubes. So like cobalt blue often appears as cobalt blue hue, or Naples yellow can be often appear as Naples yellow hue. And this is often for cheaper quality of paints, whereby they mix a variety of different pigments in order to get a cobalt blue hue. And next we have tint. Now tints are effectively a colour, for example yellow red or red orange, with white added to it. So we can think of something that's being graded down from saturation or chroma, so from its pure colour to a lighter value by adding white. And I shall show you this in the demonstration. And finally we have shades. Now shades is actually quite an important one for the painter. We actually achieve our shades by adding the complementary of a colour. So for example, if I wanted a darker red, I might consider adding some green, and that will give me a much more richer shade as opposed to adding black paint or adding brown paint. So we want to really consider adding a complementary colour to our original colour in order to create a shade. And again, I shall show you a demonstration of this. Okay, so here's some basic demonstrations on how I mix my paint and my colours. So the reason why I use the palette knives is because it's a much more controllable way to take any amount of paint you want, mix it up more evenly and completely. So if I was to use a brush to do this, and then have to clean the brush afterwards, there'd probably be too much paint caught up in the bristles, and the evenness of the mix probably wouldn't be so good either. So this is why palette knives are very useful. I'm just picking up some dry paint there. So this is me obviously making green. We all learned this when we were at school. So this would be a balanced ratio of equal amounts to make green. So blue and yellow. And see how easy it is to use a palette knives to scrape up the amount of paint you've mixed up and place it wherever you want on the palette. This is why a glass palette is so useful. Next up, I'm going to show you how to mix a blue-green, or as I was explaining before, intermediate or tertiary colours. So that would be blue-green. So I'm basically putting more blue in the mix as opposed to yellow. Next up is a yellow-green. And again, more yellow in the mix as opposed to blue. And there we have it. Now, depending on what pigment you have on your palette, you might have cobalt blue, or you might have ultramarine blue, you might have Prussian blue. You'll have different outcomes to your violets or your greens or your oranges. So again, I have ultramarine blue, alizarin crimson, chrome yellow, and of course I have my burnt sienna, or alternatively I have my burnt umber. So that's me making a red violet. And then we have our blue violet. So you get the idea with that. And now with the orange, and again you'll have different effects depending on the pigment. So alizarin crimson and chrome yellow will give a completely different orange as opposed to cadmium red and cadmium yellow. And then we have our tertiary or intermediate colours. Okay, so next we have our tint. And we can make a tint from any of these colours just by adding white. So a tint is effectively adding white to any colour. So in everyday terms, we can think of a interior design, what we call pastels. It's basically a desaturated version of an original colour. So if we had orange and we were to add some white paint to it, we would then create a tint. And of course tints can be reduced a number of stages by adding more and more white until we eventually become just white paint. So pay close attention to what I'm doing with the paint here, again using the palette knives. We can look to the work of the artist Gwen John, whose paintings were very pale but full of light, and she used a lot of tints in her work. And now next on the colour wheel, if you remember, we have our shades. So in this demonstration I'm going to use green as the colour. But of course we can use this for any of the other colours. To create a shade we add the complementary of the colour. And so for green, complementary is red. So a simple way to think of this is a complementary mixture is one mixed colour, which is like blue and yellow is green, against the primary colour, which is red. And so to make a shade, you can think of shades is the same meaning for shadows or darker areas where that light hasn't quite fallen. So in real terms we can think of shade as being in shadow, perhaps underneath a tree on a sunny day. So just like tints took it to the whiteness, with shades we're actually taking it to the blackness and the darkness. And how we do this is by adding complementary colour. So there we are. Hope you found this demonstration and tutorial useful, and I wish you the very best in all your future painting endeavours, and just keep on practicing. Do it as much as you can. Apologies for the low quality in sound. The microphone I have is a very basic one, and goodbye.